Just as Daenerys began settling into her new role as ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, a raven came bearing grave news from the north. Brandon Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, had sent word that the Night King and his army of undead would reach the wall within a fortnight. At first, Daenerys was skeptical. Such an outlandish claim of doom and resurrected dead. However, she knew better than to dismiss the words of the lord of such a large kingdom, and she herself had experienced her fair share of magic. She called for her advisors and quickly made plans to fly to Winterfell, wanting to see the situation for herself. It took an entire day to reach the north on the back of Drogon, Daenerys landing in Winterfell late into the night. As she walked through the gates of Winterfell, Daenerys saw the preparations that were being made for the coming storm. She was met by Jon Snow, son of Eddard Stark and former commander of the Night's Watch, who took her to see the witnesses, both members of the Night's Watch and wildlings. They recounted their experiences with the army of the dead and the horrors from beyond the wall. Afterwards, she got to speak with Brandon Stark in private. He gave a report of what he had seen beyond the wall, and even went as far as to tell her about the powers he had gained from the three-eyed raven. He went on to tell Daenerys about Aegon Targaryen's dream, a song of ice and fire, explaining that Aegon foresaw the end of the world of men. It was to begin with a terrible winter gusting out of the distant north. Aegon had seen absolute darkness riding on those winds, and whatever dwelled within would destroy the world of the living. He knew that when this great winter came, all of Westeros must stand against it, and if the world of men is to survive, a Targaryen must lead the forces of Westeros. A queen, strong enough to unite the realm against the cold and the dark. Daenerys, taken aback by this, asked Brandon how she could possibly believe such outlandish tales, to which Bran responded by retelling Daenerys' entire journey to this point, including events that she firmly believed only she had known about. Finally, the Dragon Queen was convinced enough to join the North in their fight against the dead. She wasted no time and sent ravens to the wardens of the other regions, urging them to send any support they could. She knew that this was not just a battle for the North, but for the entire realm. The dead did not discriminate between borders, and they would not stop until they had conquered all. As she walked through the dark yet warm halls of Winterfell, Daenerys saw the fear in the eyes of the people, perhaps a fear of the coming darkness, but she also felt that at least some of it was directed at herself. Daenerys knew that this would be the greatest challenge she had ever faced. She had conquered cities, freed thousands and defeated armies, but she had never faced an enemy quite like the army of the dead. As she began making preparations for the long night to come, she knew that the fate of the realm rested on her shoulders. But she was determined to rise to the challenge and prove herself as the true protector of the realm.
As the Starks, Daenerys and the Northern Lords feasted in the great hall of Winterfell, Brandon Stark cried out in pain. The mark on his arm burned with an intensity he had never felt before, causing him to double over in pain. He knew what it meant. The Night King had destroyed the wall, and his army of the dead was now making its way south. The army of the dead swiftly cleaved through the far north, making its way to Winterfell within just 2 weeks. The dead had breached the wall much sooner than anticipated, which meant the forces of the north were woefully unprepared. With Daenerys unsullied, and the forces from the rest of the kingdom not even having crossed the Riverlands. Despite the northern defenders' valiant efforts, the battle for Winterfell proved impossible. The air support from Daenerys and her dragons could only do so much, and all hope seemed lost when the Night King slayed the dragon Viserion with a mass of pure ice in the shape of a javelin. Daenerys' pain was evident as she was forced to burn her own child, her beloved dragon, to prevent the Night King from turning it to his side. With the situation growing increasingly dire, Sansa, Daenerys and Jon Snow were forced to retreat to the twins on Dragonback, with whatever forces still had horses also making a desperate ride south. Brandon Stark, however, refused to leave Winterfell. He stayed behind despite the pleas of his sister, and set the great weirwood tree of the Godswood ablaze. Jon Snow, being a changed man after his resurrection, was more willing to leave his soldiers and own brother to die than his previous incarnation ever would be. The flames from the burning weirwood tree of Winterfell illuminated the night sky as Brandon Stark stood at its base watching the inferno consume the ancient tree. He knew the Night King was near, and he had made his decision. He would not let the Night King take him, nor would he let him use his powers to bring more of the dead back to life. The burning tree would serve as his pyre, and he would die with it. As the flames grew higher, Brandon closed his eyes and began to meditate. He felt the mark on his arm begin to burn more intensely, but he pushed through the pain. He could hear the sound of battle growing louder and knew that the army of the dead was approaching. He could feel their cold energy and knew that his time was running out. Suddenly, he heard a loud crack, and he knew that the Night King was nearby. Brandon opened his eyes and saw the icy figure approaching him, his army of the dead following close behind. The Night King looked at Brandon with cold, calculating eyes, but Brandon did not flinch. He raised his arms and the flames from the tree engulfed him. The Night King watched in frustration as Brandon burned, the flames consuming him and the ancient tree together. He had hoped to turn Brandon into a wight, to use his powers for his own purposes, but now it was too late. The Night King growled in anger and turned his attention back to the army of the dead. With Winterfell turning to ice behind them, the army of the dead began its relentless march towards the Riverlands. The North had fallen, and the fate of the Seven Kingdoms hung in the balance.